Hey everybody, welcome to Life is Brewtiful. I'm Anthony, and today I am going to talk about one of the most fascinating, yet one of the most frustrating aspects of beer and beer history. And that is hyper locally exclusive beer style offerings. In particular, we're going to focus on the Franconian Rotbier. The Franconian Rotbier, Rotbier,
Rot.
is no exception. And yes, that's how it's pronounced, Rotbier. Even though you might see it spelled R-O-T or R-O-T-E sometimes, Rot. I tried to order a Rotbier and they gave me a Radler, so Rotbier. So diving into the history of Rotbier, it seemingly originated within Franconia, particularly famous in the Nuremberg city area. One of the largest cities, I think the second largest in all of Bavaria. Yet on a wide scale, if you ask the average beer drinker, even in Germany, Rotbier is kind of unheard of. So before we can completely dive into it, I do have to provide a little bit of a disclaimer. When talking about Rotbier, unfortunately, a lot of its history and a lot of the records that kind of detailed its origin were lost through various reasons. There were wars, there were fires, and also just a lot of people didn't really write down some of these records. So a lot of this story is going to come from contemporary sources. It's going to come from assumptions, and some of it is going to come from firsthand experiences I took there and mashing those all together with what remaining historical sources there are to kind of Frankenstein a narrative together. Okay, so first off, let's take a look at what Rotbier is, and let's figure out what makes it so unique and so special. Rotbier is a rich and complex lager with a dense khaki head, a smooth, full body that can either be filtered or unfiltered, and is usually within a sessionable 5% ABV. However, its true brilliance is shown in its stunning color. Rotbier showcases the most brilliant red I've ever seen in any beer. And that probably stems from the fact that Rot, is red in German. Kind of makes sense, right? Rotbier balances the sweetness of malt with the bitterness of hops, although I did hear on multiple occasions from the locals that it seems a bit too sweet for their liking. And Rotbier does show a sweet and savory bready note, hints of chocolate, and a surprising vinous twang that either came from the hops or perhaps a byproduct of how this unique malt ferments out. So as complex as the actual flavor of Rotbier is, its history is much more complicated. Starting at the beginning, it's kind of confusing where Rotbier was actually originally brewed. There are some people who say, yes, this was a Franconian specialty, and others say that it was inspired from the Flanders in Belgium, their red ale. I can see some of the similarities in its namesake and its appearance, but honestly, the two are so drastically different nowadays that I think it's still fair to say that they're two completely distinct beer styles. So based off of the earliest records that we have coming out of Nuremberg, we believe that the Rotbier was originally brewed sometime between 1300 and 1500 AD. Still more mystery. It's kind of unknown why or how even they really settled on a brilliant red beer. If you look at early malting techniques within southern Germany, Bavaria, Württemberg, all those places, they weren't really known for being the most advanced when it comes to malting techniques or even fermentation techniques. In fact, when compared to northern Germany, they were seen as extremely rustic and poor quality beers. All of that did start changing within that 13 to 1500 time period, thanks to the invention of pale malt and its adaptation throughout Germany. And we know that around the 1500s, Bavaria was trying really hard to try to capture the magic and the essence of the lighter beers of northern Germany, investing millions and millions of their currency at the time into white maltings and white brewed beers. And it was at this point in time where we really started seeing the rise between dunkelbraun beers and weiss white beers in Bavaria and the rest of southern Germany, to include Franconia. And it's believed that throughout this malting process, this malting technique, that they just decided, let's stop it kind of a little past white, a little before dark, and maybe an attempt to make a lighter malt or maybe to just make themselves stand out. Regardless, they were successful in both. Now, what is interesting is that the Rotbier, it seems to have originally been an ale. It would have been what was considered an alt beer. At the time when lagering was really taking over and sweeping through Europe thanks to the invention of the Pilsner, also around the later half of that millennia, we started seeing a switch from ale yeast to lager yeast, which made the Rotbier kind of jump into the modern era. And I have to assume it made a drastic change in its overall sensory analytics, its perception. But without a doubt, I can't imagine this being any other way. This was certainly a right move for the Rotbier. At its peak in the mid-1500s, there were over 35 dedicated Rotbier breweries in Nuremberg alone. There were a couple of other white and wheat beer competitors, but without a doubt, Rotbier was king. Unfortunately, its popularity kind of waned and rather rapidly. Around the 1600s, we really saw the adoption of Weizenbier, and we saw the adoption of white beer, Weissbier. It really took over, and that's incredibly unfortunate because, I mean, we already mentioned about how archaic, even for the times, southern Germany's brewing practices were. You know, they could pretty much only make like brown and black malts. It was a real struggle to make anything else. So you could almost say that Rotbier was seen as like some type of scientific advancement. It was a huge step forward in the brewing industry in that region to try and brew beers that were lighter than brown. So to see it die out due to the mass adoption of pale lagers and Weiss wheat beers, it is kind of sad. And that kind of saw a massive dwindle in breweries. I mean, even to this day, there's still only 3 breweries in Nuremberg who make Rotbier. Those issues were massively complicated by the fact that World War I and World War II greatly devastated Nuremberg, especially World War II. I mean, I've seen photographs of post-war World War II Nuremberg, and I mean, it's just ashes and destruction. It's horrific. And I mean, rarely any brewery or pre-established industry of any sense were able to survive. And following the war, there were massive food shortages and rations and everything, and there just was not enough to go around to keep the tradition of brewing Rotbier alive. Now, that's a lot of doom and gloom. However, there is a good side. Around the 80s, we started seeing a reemergence of Rotbier in Nuremberg. Most famously, the house brewery Altstadthof was the first brewery in the region to really recapture the magic of Rotbier, going back, looking at whatever records survived, and trying their best to recreate the most traditional version of that available on the market today. And if you ever get the opportunity to visit this brewery, you're going to be absolutely blown away. They're brewing this beer deep, deep, deep down into the earth in these giant rock caves. And it's so cold, and they got the barrels down there lagering, and they're doing everything as traditional as they can. Now, the other 2 breweries offer fantastic and unique experiences in their own way. I didn't get to go on their tours, but I did get to try their beers. The first one that you really should try is the Tücker Rotbier. So Tücker is one of the largest industrial breweries within Franconia, and they're going to make your bigger, more shelfy, if that's the right word for this, the more available offerings. Now, don't get me wrong, it is still of pretty good quality. I really, really enjoyed it. In fact, this was the first one I ever had, years before I even learned what Rotbier was. I just thought it was like a red beer. And if you're looking for a more craftier experience, I really encourage you to look up Schanzenbrau. You're still going to get everything that you're expecting to find out of a Rotbier, sweet, malty lager, but it definitely has a craftier edge to it. I think it has a little bit of a higher ABV, and certainly the hops were more pungent on the nose and more more assertive in the taste. So if you're looking for a crafty interpretation of this beer, that is without a doubt the one to go for. Now, if you were to look outside of Nuremberg, you can also find other examples of Rotbier. This one in particular I picked up in Bamberg, and it is the Franconian Rotbier. Same beer style, but I gotta say, on the appearance, definitely not as brilliant as the Nuremberg experiences I had, but flavor-wise, on par for sure. And if you continue to look even further outside of Nuremberg, you're going to come across other beer styles that are extremely similar, who don't market themselves as Rotbier, but without a doubt, I could see some type of like evolutionary line. It's almost like a distant cousin or a long-lost relative. And this Rosé Bock, the Rosa Bock, it's, basically just a Rotbier Bock. It's incredibly delicious, and everything that you love about this style, just more in your face. And that does bring me to my next point, and that is that throughout Germany, you're going to find red beers. You're going to see beers marketed as either Bernstein or Amber. You're going to see even red beer, red lager, red ale. But that does not necessarily mean it is a Rot beer. It might be Rot, but it is not Rot beer. So in conclusion, I gotta say that if you ever come to Germany, if you're ever in southern Germany and you find yourself in Franconia, particularly in Nuremberg, and you don't try yourself a Rotbier from one of the 3 breweries I mentioned, you are doing yourself a great disservice. It is without a doubt one of the best lager styles I've ever had the opportunity to try. It's so deep, so rich, so complex, and it is just filled with mystery. Rotbier just doesn't get the recognition it deserves. It's just not well known enough outside of its small localities. It's almost like a hyper exclusive local secret. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people kind of view it as a derivative or some type of like almost dunkel beer. And to me, it's just so much more. It's so much more special. And the breweries of Nuremberg really take that to heart. They take the essence of Rotbier and they make it a part of their cultural identity, to the point where they infight amongst each other, particularly between Altstadthof and Tucher. If you can see, this is actually an older bottle because it says original Nuremberger Rotbier. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Altstadthof was the first brewery to bring Rotbier back. Tucher following sometime afterwards. So one, they're not an original in that sense. But also, Altstadthof sued Tucher because they were not brewing their beer in the traditional sense. They weren't using barrels. They weren't doing it down in the ice caves. So it wasn't true to the essence of what Rotbier was. And because of that lawsuit favoring Altstadthof, that kind of puts hard parameters on what makes the beer style the beer style. It seems like it can't be a Rotbier, a true Nuremberg style Rotbier, if it's not brewed in that traditional sense. Everything else is just a modernization. For the life of me, I cannot understand why it has not been more widely adopted by the greater craft brewing scene. Why, out of all the beer styles that have been picked up, why this one has been so overlooked. And I truly do think it is a shame, but I would hate to see it lose its true essence and what makes it so dang special. So this is certainly one that if you have to make a journey to try one beer style, this would certainly be a contender. I highly encourage you to seek it out. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. Like, comment, subscribe. Remember, there is a story in every bottle, and that life is brewtiful. Cheers, y'all.